Ready? The hearing is called to order. This hearing is called for the purpose of discussing the matter of TSCA, and the hearing is titled the Toxic Substances Control Act and Persistent Bioaccumulative and Toxic Chemicals, examining domestic and international actions. And the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I want to welcome all of you who are here this morning to participate in today's hearing on the Toxic Substances Control Act and specific efforts that have been or need to be taken to protect public health and the environment from a diverse array of toxic substances. Our focus today is on a special group of chemicals known as PBTs that pose unique risks to human health and environmental safety. Even at a very low exposure and concentration levels in our communities, our homes, our workplaces, and the environment, PBTs have been linked to adverse health effects in humans and in animals. Some of these effects include cancers, and some include genetic mutations, and some include the disruption of the normal biological, neurological, and hormonal functions of our bodies. Examples of commonly known PBTs include unwanted wastes like mercury and dioxins. The list also includes pesticides like DDT and HCB. DDT, as most of you know, is a well-known synthetic pesticide. Also included in this list of potential toxins is HCB, or hexachlorobenzene, and other industrial chemicals such as PCBs and heavy metals, including cadmium and mercury and lead. The way I understand PBTs is to think of them in the following way. Generally speaking, the P or persistence relates to environmental safety. P, persistence pollutants or toxins are not biodegradable. That means that these chemicals do not break down easily in the environment. You can think of them in a way you think of, I like to think of them as unwelcome house guests who don't know when it's time to leave. The B stands for bioaccumulative or bioaccumulation, and it relates to human health and to environment. Following their release into the environment, some of these substances concentrate in rising proportions in soil, sediments, water, and in air. Over time, these concentration levels rise continually within and to the top, indeed, of the human food chain. And the T, which stands for toxic or toxins, relates to human health. Toxic substances lead to adverse health effects such as the ones I described earlier. What is also important to remember is that these are not mutually exclusive categories. While it can be presumed that a chemical substance which displays all three characteristics is especially harmful, a chemical substance or a mixture can display just one of these three characteristics. That is, it can be persistent, bioaccumulative, or toxic to human health. These substances are capable of traveling great distances on air or in oceanic currents. Last year I had the honor of receiving a delegation of indigenous people from Slovakia and Gambel nations. These representatives were from 2 member tribes of the National Congress of American Indians. They told my staff of serious public health issues they're experiencing as a result of pollutants, particularly legacy chemicals such as PBDEs, polybromo-diphenyl ethers, and PFCs, perfluorinated compounds that have blown and crested onto St. John's Island. At our last hearing on TSCA in November 2009, we discussed the need for including a prioritizing scheme in our soon-to-be introduced bill, which would make critical reforms to the existing 33-year-old statute. Under this scheme, the Environmental Protection Agency's chemical risk and safety assessment responsibilities will be radically streamlined. With this new authority, the EPA will be able to take much swifter action to reduce the volume of especially threatening substances that are already in the commercial stream that's in our bodies and that's in our food and water sources. I am pleased to welcome all 6 of our witnesses to the subcommittee this morning. The common thread to all of their testimonies is obviously PBTs. Today, each one of them will talk about the PBT problem and how to go about addressing it from their perspectives as government regulators, policymakers, public interests, and health advocates, and from the perspective of the industry. Each of these witnesses is prepared to testify and answer questions about PBT regulation and remediation by assessing the regulatory lay of the land, and meaning that the state and federal levels are of concern to them, and of course the impact of these chemicals on our planet. We've got just this one planet here, and we got to be concerned about it, and we got to protect it, and we got to ensure that it'll be around for a long, long, long time. It's a gift to us, and we've got our responsibility to be able to pass it on, a healthy planet, to generations to come. And I want to thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time. And now I recognize the ranking member from this subcommittee, my friend, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, for 5 minutes.
Well, Chairman Rush, thank you very much for holding this hearing on the Toxic Substances Control Act. Today we will explore what many believe are the most dangerous chemicals, PBTs. These are chemicals and substances that are long-lasting and can build up in the food chain to levels that present threats to humans and the environment. We must take steps, obviously, to ensure Americans and the environment are as safe from these hazardous chemicals as possible. But I also firmly believe that high-quality science, that is, science that is measurable, reliable, relevant, and that can be reproduced, should lead the way for whatever reforms this Congress makes to current law. Now, Mr. Chairman, I understand that at some point it is your intention to move legislation to reform TSCA. I am pleased that you're going to do that, and I hope that we, on this side of the aisle, have an opportunity to work with you and your staff as you write this legislation. With that said, it is my hope that any action we do take does not have adverse consequences similar to those that the toy bill has had. We need to recognize the nuances of the science and give importance to exposure and risk data, not just hazards. When this committee applied a precautionary ethos to the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, we closed down many small businesses because they simply could not meet the requirements that we insisted upon. And I might also mention that in an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal this past Christmas season, a former colleague of ours, now a commissioner at the CPSC, the Consumer Protection, said that the new law reduced the Consumer Product Safety Commission's long-standing discretion to act in response to genuine risks, substituting instead the rigid, broad brush, and unscientific judgment of Congress. As we have seen, good intentions do not always lead to good results. And I will simply urge that we continue to heed the lessons learned from that particular law. I do look forward to hearing today from our witnesses, all of who are experts in their field, as we try to delineate between organic and inorganic PBTs, as we look at how widespread and effective are the states that are working in this area. And then, of course, I think it's imperative that we also explore our international leadership and the fact that a number of important treaties that we are signatories have not been affirmed or confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Mr. Chairman, while it has been over 3 decades since this law has been reformed, I again would like to stress the importance that we examine the issues carefully before we make sweeping changes that could adversely impact commerce, innovation, and, of course, public and environmental health. We approach this subject with the very best of intentions, and particularly in today's economic downturn, I think that it's particularly important that we be mindful of the impact that any actions we may take on the job market. And yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes my friend, my colleague from Illinois, the vice chairman of the subcommittee, Ms. Schakowsky, for 2 minutes for the purposes of opening statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. This is the third we have held in the 111th Congress on the Toxic Substances Control Act, and I look forward to working with you and Chairman Waxman on reforming the law so that it protects our community from harmful products, for harmful pollutants. When Congress passed TSCA, its intention was to give EPA the tools it needed to protect the public from exposure to toxic chemicals that cause serious harm. However, more than 30 years later, as already has been stated, the scientific evidence is overwhelming that chemicals continue to persist in our environment, are a significant contributor to the prevalence of many diseases. Leukemia, brain cancer, other childhood cancers have increased by 20% since TSCA became law. We know for certain that exposure to substances like asbestos and mercury and many others pose lethal or catastrophic results. What these startling facts tell us is that TSCA in its current form is completely incapable of protecting the public, and that it's imperative for Congress to amend the law so that it can safeguard the American people from exposure to lethal chemicals. Today, we hear from our witnesses about a specific subset of chemicals that meet the criteria for being labeled as persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, PBTs. And I appreciate them. I appreciate our witnesses for being here today to shed light on these especially devastating chemicals. And again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding the hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes.
We thank you, Chairman Rush. Before I give my opening statement, I want to say some words about our newest ranking member of this subcommittee, my good friend from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield. I specifically asked him to take over for Congressman Radonovich because of Mr. Radanovich's situation with the death of his wife and the requirements that he take care of his young son. He didn't have the capability or the time to give the ranking membership his full attention, and I understand that. I specifically asked Mr. Whitfield to take on the duties of this subcommittee's ranking membership because it's my expectation, Mr. Chairman, that at some point in time you and Chairman Waxman intend to move legislation reforming TSCA, and I want my very best senior experienced person at the helm, and that's Ed Whitfield. He's worked in both the majority and the minority on this subcommittee, and he knows the issues well. He knows also the personalities well, and he has the confidence of both sides of the aisle. So it was not serendipity that Ed Whitfield got asked to take this ranking membership, and I think it speaks to his capabilities that he's already hit the ground running. I might also say, Mr. Chairman, that this is an important hearing. I think if you just look out in the audience, you see former general counsels for the committee and chiefs of staff for the committee, and they don't come cheap, Mr. Chairman. They're here because it's a big deal. It's an important deal, and it speaks to your leadership that you're taking this complex subject. On the issue at hand, we understand that PBTs are extremely toxic and can be hazardous. We understand that they need to be regulated closely and monitored continuously. We do have a witness from the Pelston working group here that has done some groundbreaking research, and if their research is correct, Mr. Chairman, there is a possibility that we can adopt a more flexible regulatory approach based on not only the definition of what is hazardous, but what the risk is of that hazard. So I'm looking forward to their testimony, plus obviously the testimony of the other witnesses here. Congress does not normally do complex technical issues well. As Mr. Whitfield has pointed out, in the Consumer Protection Act reauthorization last year, I don't think it was intentional, but we adopted a regulatory approach for lead, which is basically zero tolerance, and because of that there are many products that are no longer on the marketplace today that really didn't have any potential harm to the population. So in this case, I hope that we do listen to our panels, and we do work together in a bipartisan fashion to move a bill, if that's the wish of the chairman and yourself, Mr. Chairman, at the subcommittee level, that encompasses the latest science, the latest data, and so that we get this one right. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair, thanks to ranking member. The chair is proud now to introduce the gentleman from Michigan, the chairman emeritus for the entire committee, a friend who has provided sterling leadership for this committee and on this particular issue for many years. And he should have been introduced earlier, but somehow the chairman did not see him over there, which is attributable to my bad eyesight. And so now the chair recognizes Mr. Dingell for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to express my gratitude to you for your kind words. And second, I would like to observe this meeting and this hearing is very, very important and useful. And I know under your leadership, we will begin a process of reviewing carefully TSCA, what it is doing, what it is not doing, how the changes of technology and other things over the past years, some 30 of which have passed since we have done this legislation in the first place, and how those things have changed the circumstances. We're also going to need to know what changes we have to make in the legislation, and it's my hope that these things will be done carefully under your leadership, and I know that you will do this wisely, and I think that the information to be achieved will be very valuable. Mr. Chairman, with that, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I thank you for your courtesy.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing on the Toxic Substance Control Act and the subset of chemicals that meet the criteria for being labeled as persistent bioaccumulative, and toxic. PBTs are considered to be particularly harmful because they're long-lasting chemical substances and mixtures that can build up in the food chain to levels that are harmful to human and ecosystem health. PBTs can transfer easily and linger for a long time in people and the environment, and they're associated with adverse human health effects. We should take this subject very seriously. None of us want these substances negatively impacting humans or the environment. However, we must prudently go about regulating these chemicals. There are some that argue that the appearance of a PBT in the environment is not enough to warrant regulation, but rather body or tissue residues showing a direct causal link to adverse responses are necessary to justify regulatory management. Additionally, some experts make a case that regulatory action should be based on complete information in order to avoid negative unintended consequences. For example, PBT screening criteria assesses only hazard and not risk. Something may be hazardous and not pose a risk if its exposure is controlled, and a hazard assessment only provides information on the properties of the substance, not the likelihood of effects. This is comparable to problems that have resulted from taking a similar approach to lead contents limits in the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, which has led to the elimination of products that have not demonstrated a risk of lead poisoning. Our committee should move forward with this example in mind, yet I urge us to continue to place safety as the highest goal. I appreciate the witnesses being here today. I look forward to listening to their testimony. I thank you, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia. He's no longer here. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, a leading voice on these and other matters. Mr. Guest, for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, ever since Rachel Carson's landmark book, Silent Spring, we've known the dangers of chemicals like DDT that persist in the environment, bioaccumulate, and are highly toxic. When these chemicals move up the food chain, they increase in concentration, and their effects can linger for decades. So as this species at the very top of the food chain, this should worry us. DDT was banned in 1972, but its effects are felt today. Now, DDT is a pesticide covered under FIFRA, but many harmful PBT chemicals are covered under the much weaker regime of TSCA. One of those chemicals is mercury. In 2004, my state of Colorado initiated a 5-year study to assess the levels of mercury in fish in the state. 2 lakes just outside of Denver were found to have fish with high levels of mercury, and local residents are now advised not to eat fish from these lakes. Colorado's lakes are not unique, unfortunately, and it just shows why TSCA reform is badly needed. TSCA was enacted over 30 years ago, and it's our only major environmental law that has not been reauthorized. Now, one of the most important considerations in TSCA reform, and some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have mentioned this, is how to characterize the risk posed by various chemicals, focusing on those chemicals that persist in the environment and are highly toxic makes sense. And I want to point out also, I agree 100% with Mr. Whitfield and others who say that we should use science as the basis of our consideration as we look towards reauthorizing this bill. And I will also point out, to our credit, in this committee, when we reauthorized the Consumer Product Safety Act last year, we may have had some issues with lead and other substances, but due to some very good conversations with me and others on this committee, we worked out what to do with phthalates in a bipartisan way and also in a bicameral way that is science-based and that we were all very pleased with. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and everyone on this committee to make sure that not just we are safe from these PBT chemicals, but that our grandchildren are also safe as these chemicals move up the food chain.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Whitfield for having this hearing today. And I also want to thank our witnesses for taking the time to be with us. I believe we can all agree that the issue of persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, otherwise known as PBTs, is an important one that we must continue to examine. I'm pleased that this subcommittee is once again taking up the issue of toxic substances and the laws governing their use in commerce. The use and regulation of toxic substances and of chemicals in general is an issue that we all must take very seriously. First, because of the effects certain chemicals can have on our health and the environment. I know from hearing from the statements that my colleagues made today that they share these concerns. But we also want to make sure that the chemicals that are produced, used, and imported into our country are safe. But this issue is also important to me because of the chemical industry's presence in my home state of Louisiana and because of its importance to our national economy. According to the American Chemistry Council, over 96% of all manufactured goods are directly touched by the business of chemistry, making this industry a vital part of every aspect of our economy. In Louisiana, the chemical industry directly employs over 22,000 people, and for every chemistry industry job in Louisiana, an additional 4.5 jobs are created in our state. And one thing that must be pointed out is this chemical industry, these jobs are high paying. The average wage of a chemistry industry employee in Louisiana is over $82,000, which is 53% higher than the average manufacturing wage in the state. During these tough economic times, these are the kind of jobs we need to be creating more of. As this committee continues to consider legislation, we must make our decisions based on real science that is measurable, reliable, and reproducible. We must also consider the unintended consequences of actions that might be well-intentioned but don't fix the problems yet produce devastating consequences, as was the case in the last Congress when changes to the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act shut down small businesses in America. Again, it is clear that there are harmful chemicals like PBTs out there that can have harmful effects if not used properly, and the proper safeguards need to be put in place, and we know that the EPA is currently and has been taking steps to ensure that's the case. I think the key finding is the appropriate balance between protecting our health and environment and protecting a vital sector of our economy and the jobs in this industry. I believe these goals are not mutually exclusive. I look forward to hearing from our panelists today on actions that have been taken in other states and other countries to put protections in place. And I'm interested in our panelists' thoughts on the use of exposure and risk data, things that, in my opinion, should be based on sound science and should be used along with data on the hazards that chemicals may pose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Mr. Barrow is recognized for 2 minutes. The chair thanks the gentleman. Mr. Green is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on and continue looking at the modernization of the Toxic Substance Control Act. I also want to welcome and congratulate our new ranking member, Congressman Whitfield, and look forward to working with him as we move forward on TSCA modernization and other matters for the subcommittee. The issue we're looking at today, persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic chemicals, or PBTs, are widely agreed to be a small but potentially dangerous class of chemicals. Their ability to build up in the food chain and persist over long periods of time poses significant danger to human health and the environment, a fact that the EPA has recognized as they've taken action implement more rigorous screenings for chemicals that display characters of PBTs. These actions include lower reporting thresholds for PBTs on the toxic release inventory, the development or prioritization of tool for the waste streams containing PBTs, and reviewing TSCA pre-manufacturing notices for substances that meet PBT-related criteria. I look forward to our witnesses today and what further steps we can take to domestically to further protect human health and environment, but also the important in the international area. Transboundary migration of pollutants is an important issue and one this committee has worked on for some time through efforts to implement the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, the long-range transboundary air pollution, POPs, protocol, and the Rotterdam Convention on prior informed consent. Passing and implementing legislation for these treaties should be a priority in any TSCA modernization legislation this committee takes up. Mr. Chairman, I know I'm almost through with my time, but I'd like to ask unanimous consent to place a letter in the record from the American Chemistry Council today's hearing. ACC has long supported implementing the international treaties, and it sees U.S. leadership in this area as critical action in the international area, and I would encourage, if we haven't started it, to establish a working group of all the interested parties, because it's such major legislation, and I'd hope we could pass it to this Congress. So again, thank you for the hearing, and again, I welcome our witnesses.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and without hearing no objections, the letter will be included into the record. Now we recognize Dr. Gingrey for 2 minutes for the purpose of the opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling this third hearing on the Toxic Substance Control Act of 1976. I am happy that we have once again delved into this complex issue, and I appreciate the diligence of Commerce, Trade, and Consumer Protection Subcommittee to continue to examine this important issue. TSCA directs the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate all phases of the manufacturing of chemicals and to identify unreasonable risk of injury from new or existing chemicals. In regulating these chemicals, TSCA directs EPA to use the least burdensome option to reduce the risk of harm while balancing the benefits provided by the chemical. As a risk-based law, TSCA relies on the presence of sound science from both the chemical producers and the EPA in order to properly implement the law. Mr. Chairman, while there are many laudable elements of TSCA, that does not mean that this law is anywhere close to perfect. Since its enactment, chemical manufacturing processes have advanced, and so has technology. Accordingly, TSCA needs to best reflect the science that is currently being utilized. As we heard during our previous 2 hearings on this matter, TSCA reform is needed because we need to ensure the safety of chemicals used in all products. However, while there is that consensus, the way to accomplish the reform is certainly subject to debate and indeed some disagreement. Today's hearing looks at a different aspect of TSCA and its domestic and international implications for health and environmental factors of persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, PBT. Subsequently, today's panel of witnesses will discuss the efforts taken by TSCA to maintain the safe use of chemicals both at home and abroad. However, I hope that we do not use this hearing as a vehicle to fundamentally overhaul TSCA, because if we do, my fear is that we'll jeopardize the long-term viability of the chemical industry, which will have lingering ramifications for other industries and subsequently, of course, our economy. Mr. Chairman, I'd suggest that as we hear from our distinguished panel of witnesses today, we keep in mind the underlying risk-based principles that guide the current implementation of TSCA for health and environment. I look forward to their testimonies, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Sutton, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rush, for holding today's important hearing on TSCA and the persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, also known as PBTs. This is a very serious issue. Our health, the environment, and the public's confidence are at issue. And chemicals that are considered to be persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic have been associated with severe health risks and results. And these types of chemicals have been found in human bodies, and that they can build up in our food chain and last for long periods of time in our environment. In fact, PBTs accounted for 97% of all fish consumption advisories in 2008. And my congressional district includes part of Lake Erie's shoreline. In 1997, the U.S. and Canada launched the Great Lakes Binational Toxic Strategy to eliminate PBTs. And according to the State of the Great Lakes 2009 report produced jointly by the U.S. EPA and Environment Canada, releases of targeted bioaccumulative toxic chemicals have declined significantly from their peak period in past decades. The report continues to state that, quote, for the most part, bioaccumulative toxic chemicals no longer limit the reproduction of fish, birds, and mammals, end quote. And while this sounds like good news, there is still much work to be done. With funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, Ohio is investing $4.21 million in 5 projects to address toxic substances and reduce contamination. I've met with healthcare professionals in my congressional district who have expressed concern about health consequences that they have seen from chemical exposure in patients as well. And I'm interested to hear from today's witnesses how the Toxic Substances Control Act can be modernized to more effectively address these very real health concerns. Industry and a variety of environmental, animal welfare, and health and safety groups have all stated that they support modernizing TSCA. And as we move forward, we need to ensure the public's trust and protect the public and future generations from health and environmental harm, while providing industry with a clear direction to ensure that our workers keep working. It must not be a question of jobs versus the environment. We can and we must effectively tend to both. And I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this third hearing on the Toxic Substances Control Act. My continuing perspective on this is that few Americans would imagine how thin the protections are when it comes to some of these chemicals, and so it's really incumbent on us to try to modernize this oversight. I'm going to be particularly interested to hear about how we can sort of get a head start based on the fact that it's been 30-plus years since this was modernized, and science has certainly advanced significantly. So even if we're now going to come armed with a stronger set of standards for how we judge the toxicity of these various chemicals, I imagine there's a whole set of them that we already know are sinister enough that they ought to be put in a category right at the outset, so that we can sort of start on the 30-yard line or the 40-yard line instead of on the 10-yard line. And I'm looking forward to the testimony of the panel in that respect and otherwise on this important issue. And I yield back my time. Thanks.
The chair thanks all the members for their opening statements, and it is now my pleasure and honor to introduce our witnesses. We have a lineup of esteemed witnesses from both far and near, and I want to really express to each and every one of you how grateful we are that you would take the time out from your busy schedule to appear before the subcommittee and to give us your best in terms of helping to direct us as we travel down this path to revitalizing and reauthorizing TSCA. I want to introduce now Mr. James Jones, who serves as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Prevention, Pesticides, and Toxic Substances from the Environmental Protection Agency. And seated next to Mr. Jones is Dr. John Thompson, who is the Division Director for the Office of Environmental Policy, the Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Science at the Department of State. And next to Dr. Thompson is Mr. Ted Sturdivant. Mr. Sturdivant is the Director of the Department of Ecology for the great state of Washington. And seated next to Mr. Sturdivant is Dr. Linda Greer, who is the Director of Health and Environmental Programs for the National Resources Defense Council. And to her left is Dr. Christina Coyne Ellsbury, and she is the CE of Squared Consulting, former principal scientist of the Environmental Sciences Department at Procter & Gamble. And lastly, we have with us this morning is Dr. William J. Adams, who is the chairman of the North American Metals Council. And I again want to welcome each and every one of you to this hearing. And it is the practice of this subcommittee to swear in all of our witnesses. And so I would ask that each one of you stand and raise your right hand and respond to this question. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please let the record reflect that the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. And before we hear the opening statements of the witnesses, I must inform each and every one of you who are present that there are votes occurring. I don't know how much time we have left on the votes right now. less than 10 minutes. So we'll try to get to 2 or 3, and then we'll have to speed over. How many votes is it? 3. So there are 3 votes. So it will take us about a half an hour to get over there and get back. So we ask that you just be patient with us while we go and vote. After Dr. Sterling, we're going to try to finish you up before we have to go over. Is that okay? Well, thank you very much. Now, the chair recognizes Mr. Jones for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Rush and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jim Jones, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Prevention, Pesticides, and Toxic Substances at EPA. I'm here today to talk about chemicals that are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, otherwise known as PBTs, and EPA's domestic and international actions related to such chemicals. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As this committee knows, EPA's mission is to protect public health and the environment, ensuring that our citizens, and especially our children, are protected from exposure to unsafe level of toxic chemicals and pollution by continually strengthening our chemical management regime is not only central to EPA's work, but it is an area that EPA Administrator Jackson identified as one of her priorities for the agency. You have asked me here today to talk about PBTs in particular. PBTs are long-lasting substances that build up in the food chain and at certain exposure levels may be harmful to human health and the environment. Their persistent property means that when they are released to the environment, they remain essentially unaltered for months or years. With continued use and release, they build up in sediments and soil, and their concentrations increase as they go up the food chain. It is this concentration in the food chain which under certain circumstances can cause adverse effects in humans or wildlife. Some PBTs are also susceptible to long-range transport, such that adverse effects can be found far removed from their site of production or use. Combined, these properties are what make EPA concerned not only with historical PBT chemicals such as DDT and PCBs, but also with chemicals with similar properties entering commerce today or in the future. And so I'd like to take a few minutes to just touch on a few of the relevant domestic and international actions we have taken with respect to PBTs. On September 29th of 2009, EPA Administrator Jackson announced that EPA is putting in place a comprehensive approach to enhance the agency's current chemicals management program under TSCA. On December 30th, 2009, EPA posted action plans on phthalates, perfluorinated chemicals, polybrominated diphenyl ethers and products, and short-chain chlorinated paraffins. The latter 3 are PBTs. These action plans summarize available hazard exposure and use information, outline the risks that each chemical may present, and identify the specific steps the agency is taking to address those concerns. The initial chemicals selected for action plan development were chosen on the basis of multiple factors, including chemicals identified as persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, as well as other factors. But while we are moving forward to implement the actions in those plans, we know that the very nature of PBTs means that standalone action by any one country is not enough. The global nature of many of these substances is why the Obama administration identified the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, known as the POPs Convention, along with the Rotterdam Convention on Prior Informed Consent, known as the PIC Convention, as priority treaties for U.S. ratification, and why joining the POPs protocol to the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, known as the LEARTAP POPs protocol, is in our interests. By joining with the rest of the world to phase out or reduce the use and release of these PBTs, we protect both human health and the environment, not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the world. At EPA, we take the risks posed by these substances to our environment and public health very seriously, but we are hampered by our lack of implementing legislation. As your committee considers the issue of PBTs, I would stress the importance of implementing legislation that would allow the United States to join the Stockholm Convention, the Rotterdam Convention, and the LEARTAP POP protocol. The Obama administration thinks it is time to become parties to these agreements. Among our efforts to strengthen the agency's chemical management regime, we have released a set of administration principles to help guide legislative reform and outline a series of activities to enhance our programs. Much of that work will encompass PBT substances and could provide an opportunity for the consideration of implementing legislation for the POPs Convention, the PIP Convention, and the LEARTAP POPs Protocol. We look forward to working with Congress, our domestic stakeholders, and the international community to strengthen both our domestic and international actions with respect to PBT substances. Thank you for having me here today, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
The chair now recognizes Dr. Thompson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my thanks to the members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing on domestic and international actions on persistent Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my thanks to the members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing on domestic and international actions on PBTs. I have a written statement I would like to submit for the record with your permission.
Without hearing no objections,
Thank you. Advances in the discovery and application of chemicals have led to many benefits enjoyed by society. At the same time, certain chemicals impose significant risks to human health and the environment. Production and use of such chemicals is increasing outside of the United States. That is important because of the potential for local harm, and also because some chemicals are capable of having impacts far from where they are used and released. Indigenous people in Alaska and elsewhere in the United States, though often remote from such sources, may be particularly at risk to exposure because of their reliance on a subsistence diet. Of particular interest are those PBTs which are organic and capable of transporting over long distances. These chemicals are referred to as persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. We focus on these chemicals internationally because they can pose risks far from their source of release. The role of the State Department is to facilitate international cooperation aimed at mitigating these risks, and we do so working closely with our colleagues from the Environmental Protection Agency. In that regard, I'd like to describe three key international agreements aimed at controlling these types of chemicals: the Stockholm Convention on POPs, the Protocol on POPs on the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, and the Rotterdam Convention on the prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade. The Stockholm Convention aims to protect human health and the environment from exposure to POPs. It has been ratified by 169 countries, including nearly all of our major trading partners and allies. The convention calls upon parties to prohibit or restrict production and use of POPs, such as PCBs, and to reduce byproduct emissions of substances such as dioxins and furans. It includes a science-based procedure to govern the addition of chemicals and allows a party to decide whether to join amendments adding a substance to the convention. The second agreement I would like to mention is the POPs Protocol to the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution. This agreement is broadly similar to the Global Stockholm Convention, but it is regional in nature, encompassing the United States, Canada, Europe, and the former Soviet republics. A third important agreement is the Rotterdam Convention, which promotes shared responsibility between exporting and importing countries in the trade of certain chemicals. For international shipments of such chemicals, it stipulates that consent of the importing country must be obtained before the chemical can be exported. The convention helps to ensure countries have information to make decisions on sound chemicals management, which means less likelihood of health and environmental risks in those countries and in the United States. These agreements have the support of this administration and the business and environmental communities, but we are a non-party because we need legislation to fully implement their provisions. We are therefore unable, as a non-party, to participate fully in their proceedings. Only by joining these agreements can we use them effectively to pursue public health protection in the United States. What is of paramount interest to the Department of State is enabling full U.S. participation in the deliberation of these agreements as soon as possible so we can pursue U.S. interests, especially protecting public health and the environment. I also note that EPA recently announced the development of action plans to address certain classes of chemicals as potential priorities. Some of these chemicals are under consideration or are already included in the agreements that I have described. The best way for the United States to lead internationally is to do so based on a strong domestic approach that is consistent with our international obligations. By taking action at home, we can use these agreements to ensure chemicals are managed more responsibly abroad. In summary, Mr. Chairman, there are some chemicals whose use anywhere in the world may present a public health and environmental threat to the United States because they are persistent, bioaccumulative, toxic, and are transported over long distances. We are most effective leading abroad when we have been diligent and effective in addressing chemicals management at home. We have the tools to promote better management of these chemicals on a global basis through these agreements, but we need to join them to do that most effectively. Thank you for having me here today, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Right on time, Dr. Thompson. Mr. Sturtevant, would you please hold your testimony until we return? The committee stands in recess until 11:30.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,